Hello and welcome back. I'm Thomas Boucher and this is part 2 of rekeying some chest locks. So in the last video you saw me roll up the stem. So in this video I'm going to make the rest of the pieces and finish up the key. So I'm going to start off by forging the bit. Now for this, pretty much all I'm doing is upsetting the end of it because it needs to flare out. So I'm going to use the vise to grab onto it and just hammer the material down, and that way it'll swell and spill over the top of the vise jaws. So next I need to get this trimmed up to the size it's going to have to be on the key, and I'm going to have to leave a little bit of a piece to rivet into the tab I left on the end of the stem. And I left the stem long. I'm going to leave this long so that I can just cut everything on the end off that's riveted on that I don't need or want. So I've estimated what height I need this to be, and I've given myself two lines here. One is kind of what the overall finish height needs to be, and one is where I'm going to trim it now. And that's going to allow me a little bit of extra room to file up the swelled up part of the bit here and still end up where I want this to ultimately be for the height. You may also remember that tab that I left on the end of the key stem. I drilled a 1/8 inch hole into it and I bent it up and twisted it into the center of my seam so that way I can rivet the bit in line with my seam. So I got the height of the bit trimmed down. What I'm going to do next is I'm going to use a round file to file with the length of it just to give it a slight radius to kind of hug the top of the key stem. It's very subtle, but you can see that it contours the stem a little bit better. Alright, so I've got the bit cut down. I cut it mostly to length. I left a little room to file. I left this little bit here, and I'm going to file a tenon on the end of that, and that's going to be riveted to that little tab on the end. So that's fitting pretty good. I'll have to rivet it on, and then I'll probably have to tweak it because I imagine it'll move around on me a little bit. So right now I'm trying to make sure that the bit is pretty much straight up and down to the stem. And that's a little tricky because since I have that riveted tab, it's hard to see where that seam is on the front to make sure that I'm right over it and going straight up and down. So I was just checking this against the lock and my drawing, and it seems that I left myself a little bit too much in the height for the allowance of trimming it up. So I actually took it off from the stem, and I'm going to trim this down some more and I'll re-rivet it on. So I'm going to work on this a little bit and get that fit up better. So I have to determine how much length I need for the bow. And this is a pretty cool tool. I'm not 100% sure what it is, but I believe it's for measuring stuff on maps. And it's a dial with a little traveling wheel. And as you roll across your drawing, it gives you measurements in inches. So I've had to expedite things a little bit, and I did a few steps off camera as this is a job and I feel like it's taking me a little bit longer than I would like, so I'm trying to kind of move through it as quick as I can. I finished doing the bow earlier. It's pretty rough. I spent a lot of the time this past year working on my shop and my books. I haven't forged as much as I would like, so I'm a little rusty. So there's more cleanup on this than I'd like to admit, but I think it'll get me to where I want to be. It took me a while to play around trying to get it to the shape that I want, but ultimately I ended up getting it there. I also forged an octagonal piece for the collar, and I drilled a hole through it. That should be a pretty tight fit on the stem. So what I'm going to do now is try to go through and clean these pieces up. So I just finished cleaning everything up, kind of loosely assembled. I did end up using some wire on the bit because I don't want that back end to peel away or shift, even though it is riveted on the front. So I think what I'm going to do at this point is fire up the forge and try brazing it. I'm going to try to get that in there and get it to slowly come up to temperature. Alright, I'm going to see about putting some flux on it. The braze is running. Obviously, you can see all the brass down there along the center here on the stem. It seemed to have gone pretty well. It did get down here a little bit on the collar, and I can see a little bit up around the bow, but I feel like it probably could be a little bit better. So I'm gonna, like I said, clean this up and see if I need to rebraze it. But I do have a feeling that up here, especially in the seam there on the stem, you can see it didn't quite flow there. And there may be a little bit in there, but we'll see. The bow twisted on me just a touch, but I think that's alright. It's not too bad. Overall, pretty happy with that. Riveting it onto the end here, I think it worked pretty well. It was a little finicky trying to get that squared up just how I wanted it. And I think it probably was a good idea putting these wires on here, because I do think that that helped me to really keep the bit where I wanted, you know, in this orientation, as well as from peeling up away from the stem. Pretty happy with how that process went. So I'll soak that overnight in pickle and take a look at it tomorrow. I didn't film the process, but I did end up having to rebraze the key with the torch. I wasn't 100% happy with how it went in the forge. There are a few spots that the braze didn't flow into enough, so I wanted to make sure to cover those. So now that I have the key cleaned up some, I think I'm going to start trying to fit it to the wards. So I'm going to trim off this little bit of a tab here. I did leave it a little long, so there will be some more here I can cut off, but I want to start trying to get it fit to at least the first one, and then I'll trim it some more and get it working on the other one. So I'm going to start there. So earlier I was able to put the first ward cut in. It needs to go a little deeper and I need to actually trim the bit a little bit more. But I didn't want to trim it to its final length because the end of it tends to get a little scuffed up trying to cut these things in. I'm going to continue cutting that in, getting this fit so the key goes completely in, and then I'm going to start working on cutting the other wards. So I finally got the key going in and starting to turn. It only goes a little bit because it starts to hit another ward in there. It took a little bit of fooling around with and fussing with to get that one ward to fit properly. The ward that I'd cut in the bit took a tiny dive on the inside, the crotch of it. And so I had to file that up some and get it so that it wouldn't rub. I didn't have to open up much. I always start with these things a little bit thinner because that way it allows me room to adjust it rather than just starting with a big ward, because the tighter you can get it, the better I tend to think it is. So I started with it real small, just slowly opened it up until it fit, and it's turning pretty well now. I think it'll break itself in just a tiny bit, and of course I'll clean it up some more as I'm going through the process, but for right now I think it's going pretty good. I've got the location marked out for where the second one needs to go, so I'm going to start cutting that in. It's really hard to kind of get down in here to show you, so I can't really show you a shot of it. The lighting in here is terrible too, but I'm going to start trying to cut that one in. So after quite a bit of fussing with all the wards on the key, I've got it operating the lock. It does stick in a couple places still, so I think I need to clean up some of the wards a little bit. But the lock's also pretty dirty, so I may blow it out and wax the key a little bit, and I think it'll stick a little bit less. But you can see the key is functioning, the lock. So I think I'm going to leave it there for now and start cleaning up the bow, because I need to shape that. So I think I pretty much got this to a point that I'm happy with. So I filed it up some, cleaned it up. I did some quick sanding on it, and then what I like to do is wire brush it or hit it on like a wire wheel. And I think it really kind of gives it a nice little quickie polish. I mean, this isn't like a perfect mirror finish, but I don't typically take my stuff to that kind of a finish. I kind of like having some of the tool marks. So what I'm going to do now is just put a light coat of paste wax on it. And then I'm going to tighten the lock again and see if that wax kind of helps a little bit, and just see if there's any little spots in the wards that I need to address. I've got those filed a little bit more, so it's really not sticking as much, but there are a couple spots where it still sort of just slightly catches, so I think the wax might help that out. So I'm just going to rub some of this on, and then I'm going to wipe off all the excess. So So this will just put kind of a nice little light coating on there. Seems to function well. It doesn't feel like it's rubbing really at all, which is good. Turns pretty smooth. May just be, yeah, one little spot right there maybe. It's pretty minor. Some of that stuff will settle itself out once the key and the lock get to know each other a little better. Once they've kind of worn each other in a little bit. One thing I do know is that the keeper is 1 15/16. And that's exactly what this opens up to. There's a little bit of a wear spot, which is actually 2 inches, so I believe that that should work. So yeah, pretty happy with that key. Came out really well. Fits the lock nicely. I think that'll be a fitting key. If you enjoyed this video, please consider subscribing to my channel if you haven't already, as it really helps me out and it'll keep you up to date on projects such as this one and other things I have going on, such as my shop build. Please also share this with anybody that you think might be interested, as I'm really trying to grow my channel. So thanks again for watching. Bye.